Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 376, Of Course I Prayed. In the Johnson edition, we're going to move from this poem, Of Course I Prayed, to poem 377, To Lose One's Faith Surpass. And then finally 378, I Saw No Way, the Heavens Were Stitched. And in all three of these poems, we're going to see a certain kind of unifying theme, a challenge, if you will, a theological challenge, if you will. And you can, of course, already hear it in the language of 376, Of Course I Prayed. We got to imagine that somebody must have asked Emily about something terrible happening in her life. Maybe she'll use the word misery. Well, did you pray about it? And her response is, of course I prayed. And it will be a poem like this that will have led us to call this series Chats with Emily, because it's a very kind of almost like defiant way to start a poem. Of course I prayed. What are you, out of your mind? Now, this poem was published in 1929 in the Saturday Review of Literature, and it certainly would have caused a certain kind of theological discussion to have happened. In some ways, we're back to poem 61, Papa Above, and the theodicy question. Of course, our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. And I'm hopeful if you've done that, you've worked with our set of introductory comments where we talked about our big five in room 303. What does this text say about epistemology and what you can know? We're going to see that for sure in this poem and the two poems to follow. What does this poem say about ontology and who we are? What does this poem say about psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind? But most importantly, in our big five often, it is this question of theodicy. It's the question of Milton's Paradise Lost. To justify the ways of God to men is the way that he will say it, of course, there. We've given full lectures on Paradise Lost at learnstrong.net as well. But the question of theodicy is the question of why must there be pain and suffering in this world? And why is it that a God, who, by the way, Emily will believe in, she's no atheist, will allow for a certain level of smart misery. In that regards, like what's going on in that, and in that way, I'm hopeful as well that you have already read the preceding 375 poems, and if you have, we just finished with 375, The Angle of the Landscape. You'll be able to place this poem, and the two to follow, already in a certain category of poems that you've already seen, and a number that we will see going forward. Now, several of you have pointed out that it seems as if Emily was very influenced by the Bible and especially by the book of Psalms. And I don't think there's any question about that. And in fact, when we meet a poem like this, we cannot help but think that Emily is channeling at least a couple of different passages from the King James Version of the Bible. The first one is Psalm 13, which runs like this. How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall mine enemy be exalted over me? Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Lighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say, I've prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved. But I have trusted in thy mercy. My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. I will sing unto the Lord, because he hath dealt bountifully with me. Now, certainly the last two verses of this Psalm 13 are very hopeful. For Emily, though, I think very much she's channeling the opening lines as in, where is God? Here she'll make the argument God doesn't care. She's balancing, of course, a psalm like that with the Matthew 7:7-8 passage. Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. The same presentation of idea in John 14:13 and 14. And whosoever shall ask in my name, that will I do, and the Father may be glorified in the Son. If ye shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. Now, the great scholar Sewell and biographer of Emily said that Emily quote, never made a starker statement of a deprived existence, end quote, than this poem. It is, one scholar has pointed out, a bitter poem where she will accept that God exists, but that God does not care. To that degree, one scholar has pointed out that Emily believed in God, but not in his mercy. And another scholar has pointed out about this poem that Emily dismissed prayer as an act of desperation, quote unquote. Now, let's read the poem. And then let's hear the longing in this poem to try to understand the question of pain and suffering and sorrow. Many, many readers have been able to identify with the challenge of this poem. Let's enjoy it. Of course I prayed. And did God care? He cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, "Give me my reason, life I had not had but for yourself. 'Twere better charity to leave me in the Adam's tomb, merry and naught and gay and numb, than this smart misery." Now, of course, it's brilliant, the use of the word smart, as in keen, obviously, as well as intelligent, the way in which it cuts both ways. She'll use this phrase, of course, one other time in poem 247. It is, of course, right away, the word prayed that we're going to focus on. You'll remember it from poem 61, and the challenge of poem 61, Papa Above. We'll see it when we get to poem 437, which will be for us a challenging poem. That poem as well will be for us, we'll come back obviously to this study when we meet it. 437 runs like this: prayer is the little implement through which men reach where presence is denied them. They fling their speech by means of it in God's ear. If then he hear, this sums the apparatus comprised in prayer. When we get to poem 502, we'll hear another poem about prayer. When we get to 1751, she'll say it this way: there comes an hour when begging stops, when the long interceding lips perceive their prayer is vain. Thou shalt not is a kinder sword than from a disappointing God. Disciple, call again. Of course, disciple, call again in quotation marks. Well, poem 1601, we'll see her another poem about prayer. She says, of course I pray. And then she'll ask a rhetorical question. Of course, this takes us back to poem 193 and the quest to know. I shall know why when time is over and I've ceased to wonder why. Christ will explain each separate anguish in the fair classroom of the sky. He will tell me what Peter promised, and I for wonder at his woe, I shall forget the drop of anguish that scalds me now. That scalds me now, we commented when we did that poem, how she repeats herself. Here, notice it's, of course I prayed, and did God care? And then she uses this amazing comparison. She says, he cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot. Now, when we get to poem 791, we'll come back to this one. God gave a loaf to every bird, and just a crumb to me. I dare not eat it, though I starve my potent luxury. To own it, touch it, prove the feat that made the pellet mine. Too happy for my sparrow's chance, for ampler coveting. It might be famine all around, I should not miss an ear. Such plenty smiles upon my board, my garner shows so fair. I wonder how the rich may feel. An Indiaman, earl, I deem that I, with but a crumb, am sovereign of them all. She's back to this idea of being a bird, and she says, God cared about as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, "Give me." Again, this theologically stamping of the feet. In other words, a demanding, if you will, from Emily to explain why the misery, smart misery, as she'll say it at the end of the poem, happened. What's interesting about this poem, though, is that it seems as if Emily's not talking to God here, she's talking to someone else. Maybe Reverend Wadsworth, for example, who asked, maybe off the cuff, well, did you pray? Of course I prayed. And God cared not at all, right? Not at all. And then she almost seems to shift and speak directly to deity. And she'll say, my reason, life, I had not had, but for yourself. So she's no atheist. She will admit, oh, I know I have my life because of you, God. But then she'll say, 'twere better charity, you'll remember this from poem 34, to leave me in the atom's tomb. Now here she's channeling Ecclesiastes 4:3 in the King James Version. Yea, better is he than both they which hath not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. Some translations of it's better never to have been born. To leave me in the Adam's tomb would have been better. Why? Notice the 4 here. I would have been more merry and not, that is to say, not at all, and gay and numb. Notice the dancing between merry and not, gay, happy, and numb. You'll remember from poem 280, my mind is going numb. Anything would have been better then. Now we're back to her and her comparisons. This smart misery. You'll remember misery from 293. She uses the word 10 times in her poems. When we get to poem 462, she'll talk about misery this way. Why make it doubt? It hurts so much, so sick to guess, so strong to know, so brave upon its little bed to tell the very last they said unto itself and smile and shake for that dear, distant, dangerous sake. But the instant, the pinching fear that something it did do or dare offend the vision and it flee, and they no more remember me nor ever turn to tell me why. Oh, Master, this is misery. The idea, of course, of it being smart, as in keen or felt hard, and then, of course, smart as in, kind of intelligent misery, right? Leads us, of course, to ask it to what is Emily really arguing here? And I think her argument is that it is hard to live with doubt. It is hard to have to come to terms with the pain and suffering of our life. At 2b, not what she says, but how she says it, notice that she seems to go almost from a certain kind of assurance to a certain level of questions that are profound. The informal language is as well compelling. The way in which Emily will chat with us, or whoever, of course, defiant almost, and then to speak to God directly, it had just been probably better if I'd never been born in the first place. And think of how many times in the Bible, Emily would know it well, that same sentiment might have been expressed. You'll remember that Elijah himself will in fact argue it would have been better. All of this, and Jeremiah of course comes to mind. In the prophetic tradition, Emily seems to feel confident at times playing in that game. We have that kind of notion of feeling really down. At 3a, well, we read so many poems. 502 of course comes to mind, as well as the 1751 poem. At 3b, to own a poem like this, how do you deal with rejection? How do you deal with the fact that sometimes when pain happens, you have nothing that you can say to it? Of course, Emily's ultimate goal will be to not ask, why did this happen to me, but rather, why did this happen for me? Thank you.